I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're delving into the magical world of a magical book. It is called Child of Dawn, and it's written by a terrific author by the name of Leslie Ann Lee. This captivating fantasy novel explores a realm ruled by elves and vampires, where an unlikely prophecy must be fulfilled to prevent destruction. Join us as we uncover the journey of Anda, who discovers her true power, and Dagsbrun, a tormented immortal seeking peace. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Prime 7 Media for helping us put her in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support authors like her by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing her amazing book. The links are below this interview. Leslie, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. It's quite a world you have created in Child of Dawn. Tell us a little bit about the inspiration for it. Where did you get these ideas?
Yeah, so it's actually really random. We were coming out of COVID. My kids were still at home. I have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, and we were reading a really beautiful version of the classic Beauty and the Beast. And after reading it, they went off and did their own thing. And I started kind of thinking, what would happen if Beast didn't change? If he stayed the way he was for whatever reason, the spell wasn't broken, would Beauty still love him? And that was kind of like the initial spark, I guess you could say, for Child of Dawn. What we're so used to there being a monster and the monster changing, a spell is broken and then everyone lives happily ever after. But what if the monster just stayed the monster? Would they be lovable? And so that was kind of the beginning. And it wasn't until 2 or 3 years later that I really started kind of putting the book together. But that was the kind of once upon a time. That's how it got
Very
started.
cool. Isn't it great how COVID, this time where we were locked down, we couldn't work, um, at best we could do is maybe take a walk, and that was a privilege, that it became such a time of creativity and inspiration for many people.
Absolutely. You had to do what you had to do to survive. And for creatives, I mean, being locked down, creatives generally are very outgoing, they want to be around people like themselves, and we couldn't. So we
Right.
had to do everything we had to, to survive mentally and physically.
Simple pleasure of reading a book with your children is wonderful. And look what it brought about. It brought about this wonderful book. Tell us a little bit about the main characters, Anda and Dagsbrun, and their story.
Yeah, so this world of the Vale is full of vampires and elves, and then as we come to discover, there are what are known as halflings. So vampires who have married elves or vice versa. And Anda is one of those. She actually has a human father and a elf mother. And so in this world, that is something that she is very she's judged for. She's kind of an outcast because she's essentially a half-breed, and that's not acceptable in this world. And so she has to deal with that and kind of wrestle with her own identity and where she fits in and what she can contribute as this halfling. In the same way, Dagsbrun is a half vampire, half elf who had parents who loved each other very much and were ultimately punished for that. And so he has this very large chip on his shoulder in regard to both the elf and vampire communities because they ultimately destroyed his mother and father. And so for him, it's again, how do I deal with my identity? How do I deal with who I am? His vampire self is very dark and menacing and essentially a hunter, and his elf self is, something that loves the light and goodness. And so there's always this internal conflict. So it's very much a book about kind of finding your place and your identity and then coming to terms with all of that, even though it's set in a non-real world.
Exactly, exactly. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of the story? You've explained the characters quite well and their little struggles, but give us a little bit of Once Upon a Time There Was, and
Yeah,
just give us the Reader's
yeah.
Digest version of it.
Yeah, so once upon a time there was this magical place called the Vale, which is ruled in half by vampires, and then the other half is ruled by elves. And for a millennia, they have been at war. Nobody really knows why. They just know that they hate each other. Um, there is the possibility for elves and vampires to cross over into the human world, and sometimes that happens, and that's how Anda's parents meet. And that's also where she meets Dagsbrun through a series of events. And they both main characters come to discover that there is an ancient prophecy that kind of says how the world of the Vale can be saved, and they are both a part of that. So it's them coming to understand who they are and then how they kind of connect to one another and what they need to do in order to save the world that ultimately has kind of mistreated them, but they come to realize that they need to do what is right and figure out a way to save the Vale.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, have your kids read it?
My daughter has. My son is trying.
Yep.
Um, he he again, he's 10, so
Right,
his interest in what I've created is not as large as my daughter's.
right.
Um, but they are my biggest fans, and they'll be
Awesome.
thrilled that I'm actually talking about them because that's their favorite thing to know that mommy's talked about them in an interview. So,
Yeah, you've talked to them about them on TV, so they'll be twice
yes,
as psyched, which is
exactly.
great. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Have you envisioned this as a film or a series, perhaps?
Yeah, so I when I write, my method of writing is very much I see it almost as a screenplay, as something playing out on a big screen. And I've always kind of written like that. I have a vast love for film, classic, modern, whatever. And so I think that really has kind of been integrated into my writing. With this particular book, I was doing an interview early early last year, I think around January, February, and the person interviewing me, just kind of randomly put it out there, why don't you turn this into a screenplay? And I had never thought of it, tackling that myself.
Right.
And but, challenge accepted. And I did just that. I had no idea what I was doing. It took a lot of learning and a lot of drafts. I think we went through about 6 or 7 before I was kind of satisfied. And so now this not only is a book, but it's also a screenplay.
Awesome. And sometimes not knowing what to do is the best thing in the world because you're not tied to what your professors or what the instruction manual told you. You know what I mean? You're free to create in your own theater of the mind. So I think that's a great thing. And I do think it's such a unique story with very, very inventive characters. I think it'd be a great series of films. Are you thinking about this also as a series of books? Are there going to be more books to follow?
Yeah, so again, was not planning on it at all.
Yeah.
I really hadn't planned beyond this book what I was going to do next. And people, when I say fan club, it's not like I have a million followers. I don't. But the people that read my stuff and they've been faithful, a lot of them came to me and were like, "Where's the sequel? Like when can we expect that?" And I had no idea what I was going to do for a sequel. But I started writing that actually beginning of June. And so my goal is to be done by October, to have that done and have it out for October sales, like for Halloween. It kind of goes. So yeah, you just
Awesome.
never know what's going to happen.
Exactly. And well, that's the wonderful part of life, not knowing what's going to happen,
Exactly.
Yeah. Particularly if you're a person who can embrace the unknown, which obviously you are because you love the realm of fantasy.
Yes.
Tell us the significance of the title Child of Dawn.
So it kind of goes back to Dagsbrun's character. I've always been fascinated with vampires, not necessarily like the Twilight type vampires. There's nothing wrong with them, but I like the classic Dracula story, and then the stuff that Bram Stoker read in order to come up with Dracula, the old stuff. And um obviously for anybody who knows about vampires, they can't do light, traditionally speaking. They'll burn alive. My vampires in this do not. They can do light. But so you had his darkness, and then you also had his light side that came from his mother. So he's kind of caught in between the two. And so I thought, okay, what is kind of like in between night and day, dark and light? It would be dawn. And when that kind of clicked, I was like, oh, well, there's the title. Like, this is perfect. So
And it's very, very intriguing. It captures your attention. And, they say you can't judge a book by its title or its cover, but that's what everybody looks at first, the title, the
absolutely,
cover,
100%.
before they crack it open to read. And then it's the first paragraph. So it's the title, the cover, the first paragraph.
Yep.
And all of those are winners with your book, and
Okay.
including every other paragraph that follows for sure. The name of the book is Child of Dawn. It's written by Leslie Ann Lee. It is a captivating fantasy novel that explores a realm ruled by elves and vampires, where an unlikely prophecy must be fulfilled to prevent destruction. It's a great, great read. You'll want to get lost up and caught up in this world. You'll be sorry when the book ends, but you'll be happy to know that Leslie is coming out with a sequel. Leslie, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate your time. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time. This time, until next time, on Spotlight.